Okay. And there she goes.
Poof.
Cheer, poof.
All right, let's see. I probably need to go hit Truth Social real quick and remind everybody.
I did post something there, just FYI. But once again, Bridget, I can't keep your names straight, so you were not tagged in it. But I did post something there as well.
That's all good. I think you did tag me.
Did I tell you as well? Did I find you fine?
Oh, you're breaking up. What'd you say?
Did I find you?
I think you did. I think you did.
Okay. All right.
Because I saw something alert me.
All right, I reminded everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm going to hit my mute again.
And Liza, you didn't even notice. I got my bird shirt on. Since she's not here, she's here.
We can't see that far down.
Ah.
All right. I still don't see us over there yet.
That's the weird delay.
There it comes. Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And what we're going to talk about today is some fairly disturbing things that we found on a dive into WACO after the Jonestown series show that we did. And I want to introduce everybody who they normally are not on the screen. They're normally in the chat. Bridget and Liza are here with me tonight and will kind of help with the unveiling of this information. And I'm going to start with basically the bottom line up front and tell you what what conclusion we came to, and then I want to walk you through how we got there. There's a lot of, there's the guy, SR71. There's a lot of information that we've put out about Operation Gladio. And obviously one of the consistent questions we get is, how does that relate to us here in the United States? And we've been able to pull bits and pieces out, like we talked about the Cuban exile crowd and the Orders of Nine Angle and those types of things. Obviously, there's a lot more because there was never just one in any of the other countries. And so we started looking, and it became quite obvious that when you're looking at WACO, you can't look at WACO without looking at Ruby Ridge. And you can't look at Ruby Ridge and WACO without looking at the Oklahoma bombing. And I'll explain that in just a second. But what we didn't know is that there was a precursor to WACO that I don't think anybody knows. And we're going to talk about that in a second. And so here's my 30,000 foot look before we zoom in. There was a need for a narrative to be set in the United States in order to destroy our country and bring us to where we're at today, that could be used as a bludgeoning force against anybody that stood up. And the people that they knew would stand up against a tyrannical government kind of fits a few profiles. For example, Christianity, patriots. So it was very necessary to create a hive of white nationalists around patriot strongholds. And that basically is what Ruby Ridge became. They painted those people, rightly or wrongly, as white nationalists. And that, of course, harkens back to the KKK and blah, blah, blah. So they created a narrative with what happened at Ruby Ridge about white nationalism and how that's a bad thing. Then you move to Waco, and they created a narrative there of radical nationalist Christians, people who took Christianity to the far extreme and basically ended up killing their flock. So now we've got white nationalists and we got Christian nationalist narratives going. But they needed one more thing. They needed to turn both of those things not as victims of over zealous government officials, which in fact they were. We had to then turn that around and put it the opposite way and make them the terrorist, which is what Oklahoma bombing did. Because we know that Timothy McVeigh was at Waco. So we've tied Oklahoma to Waco, and we tied Waco to Ruby Ridge. And so now we have white nationalists, we have Christian nationalists, and they're both terrorists. So that kind of set us up. And what is the bludgeoning force that they've used ever since? Criminalizing Christianity, criminalizing people who stand up and don't believe that BLM is a thing. And if you do, then you're a white nationalist, and then automatically you're a terrorist. They've used this narrative quite frequently since that time. So, but we want to go back to an event that no one remembers. And for whatever reason, this is a common theme through all of this. These people, and we know what the reason is, it's a satanic, the beginning of the sacrificial 10-day period for Baal and satanic worshipers happens to be my birthday, April 19th. So keep that in mind as we walk through this entire scenario, because they love doing bad things that end up with dead bodies on April 19th. So there's this organization we came across called the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord. Now, this entity came about as a fringe group of a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or in this case, Church of Jesus Christ of the Savior, which is a derivative of that church. And we're going to see a lot of these churches, whether it's the Mormon church or whatever, that has these offshoots that seems to almost be and we'll talk about that. But anyway, let's look at this guy. The Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord. Well, it just so happens that the sword looks an awful lot like the dagger in Operation Gladio. Not saying that there's any coincidences there at all, but it does look alike. And this group set up shop in Arkansas at a place, weirdly enough, named the Farm, which is what they call the CIA headquarters. Just saying.
Bingo.
And they did so back in 1971-ish timeframe. But if you fast forward to 1985, you have federal and state law enforcement go to this compound and basically stage a 3-day siege, which looks remarkably like the sieges that we're going to find later on. And this is in close proximity to setting up the hostage rescue capability of the FBI, almost like they're trying to check it out. So you find that the founder of this organization is James Ellison, and he's the one that purchased the place. He sets up an airstrip. which is awful convenient. And Ellison was mentored by two guys. The first guy is Richard Butler, who is an extremist from a British faction, because everything goes back to Britain, that is called British Israelism. And they classify him basically as a Nazi associated with the Aryan nation. And then you have the actual founder of the Aryan nation, a guy by the name of Robert Miles. Butler is the founder of Aryan Nation. Miles is the founder of the Mountain Church of Jesus Christ the Savior in Michigan. So both of them very extreme. But Ellison had very close ties to the Aryan Nation that was based in Idaho, which, by the way, just as happens to be where Ruby Ridge ends up later on. So that's, I need to plug in my computer, so I'm going to do that while I'm talking here. That's very interesting, I think. So.
Can I throw something out there? One caveat, one little side note is that according to, and this is where you really see the beginning of when they start using domestic security terrorism in conjunction with some kind of a Christian group. And they literally start plugging the two together. And that's really when they're starting to push this narrative.
So, obviously, just very similar to the WACO philosophy, they believe that doomsday's going to be here any second. But more interestingly than any of it is the fact that they begin training paramilitary operations, which harkens us back to Operation Gladio. And they have lots of different belief systems, but they call the government a Zionist occupied government. And they begin this training called End Time Overcomer Survival Training. So for all intents and purposes, this, hundreds, 224 acre compound that they purchase out in the northwest border of Arkansas in Missouri. And basically what they set up is they do terrorist training here, and they begin launching attacks across the border into Missouri, which they eventually get arrested for, and they're killing people. So it very much looks like everything that we've looked at before, but here's the dates I want to, and you guys can go research it yourself. I'll write an article about it later because there is a lot more here. I'm just glossing over. We have so much to get to. But the dates I want to, because as we're thumbing through this, we're going, oh, there's the siege. Oh, it started on April 1985. That's very close to April 19th. And then the next line, it says, oh my gosh, April 19th, 1985, the FBI and ATF, led by the FBI hostage rescue team, positioned around 300 federal agents. The operation needed to be kept secret, but doing so was not easy in a small community, blah, blah, blah. So basically the morning of the April 19th, just like with WACO, they surround the compound, and basically they've got snipers positioned all around, just like WACO. It basically looks like they have the news out there. So there's a lot of different corollary conversations to have about this. But what is also interesting is the U.S. attorney on this case was Asa Hutchinson, who, of course, we know later goes on to be the Arkansas governor. Okay. And the last coincidence, Richard Wayne Snell, the man who shot and killed the police officer and pawn shop owner in Missouri, that was one of their cross-border assassinations, is put to death on April 19th, 1995, the exact same day that Timothy McVeigh blows up Oklahoma federal building.
That
So
should make about anybody's head blow up, you know?
correct. Absolutely correct. So you can kind of see the whole evolution there. All right, so we're going to leave that one, and we're going to move on to WACO, and I'm going to turn it over to Bridget, and she's going to spend a couple of minutes. And let me just tell you guys, this is going to be a long story. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you. If we run longer than 2 hours, we will do a part 2. Go, Bridget.
Okay. Now, the one that there's just a little caveat I want to mention here, because Ruby Ridge, how this whole thing started is looking backwards at things we were lied to with the Gladio glasses on. Because all of a sudden, when I did, and I questioned the narrative, things weren't adding up. And when we went back to Ruby Ridge, all of a sudden we found all of these overlaps. In Ruby Ridge, one of the biggest things was they were married, let's see, in 1971, married in Iowa. One of the things back then, they were barred from homeschooling. Essentially, if you tried to homeschool your children, they would come and arrest you for child abuse. And now the same schools are pushing all this cross-gender stuff. Anyway, in August of 1983, they decided to pack up and head to the mountains. In the 1980s, the right wing, there were quite a few right-wing survivalist groups, and you'll start noticing this expression keeps getting repeated and repeated and repeated. We know how the Mockingbird media works. One of the things that ends up coming out, when they went in against one man, his wife, their baby, and three young children. And yet, just like Waco, they brought in the military tanks to take two adults and a handful of children to get them to surrender. The violation that he was accused of is creating a sawed-off shotgun. They came in, the first thing that they did they started with a 5-month surveillance that ended up culminating, supposedly, in a couple of police standing outside these people's homes with night vision goggles on. Their dog goes off, and here's another, you're going to see these overlaps. The first thing that these officers do, they kill their dog. I'm a dog lover. It's a significant psychological trap that they're pushing on people. They did the same thing in Waco. The very first thing that the ATF agents did when they arrived on the scene, they killed all their dogs. They didn't just kill their dogs. They lined them up head to tail in front of the compound. When we went on back to Ruby Ridge, they end up in this massive standoff. But now the ironic thing is, he was solicited by an undercover CIA, FBI asset to create this sawed-off shotgun. When this guy went to jail for having that sawed-off shotgun, they blamed it on this man. Now, he claimed that he did not do it, and anymore I have to kind of question the narrative, because everything that I found out with Waco turned out not to be true. They lie to cover their bases. And again, one of the other overlapping things was that they came in and they threatened him, trying to get him to become their new undercover agent within the Aryan, white nationalist groups. When he said no, they said, okay, then we're going to pursue you for the sawed-off shotgun, which he, again, claims he didn't do. They do arrest him. They bring him in without incident. He faces, now, the judge turns to him when they released him to set a trial date, They told him that if he was convicted, they were going to take everything, their house, everything. Again, more psychological manipulation. So they release him. And then, wouldn't you know it, 5 months later, all of a sudden newspapers start writing articles about this man who's apparently thumbing, quote, thumbing the nose at the FBI agents. Well, he wasn't on the run. He wasn't hiding what he was doing. He was living at his home. They knew right where he was. Again, they came in. All of a sudden, 5 months of this goes on, and all these newspaper headlines. And, well, it gets to the point where he knows they're going to come for him. When they do, they bring 2 armored tanks, hundreds of men, including a sniper that just so happens to be the same sniper that was used in Waco. The first thing they do is shoot his wife while she's holding the baby. And in the first incident, they killed his 13-year-old boy. He ended up returning fire, and yeah, he shot one of their officers. But this is all these coming in for a family. This is not somebody who wasn't arrested before. He went in peacefully. Again, they lived out in the native groups. They supposedly carried weapons wherever they went. Well, if any of you have spent any time out in the wilderness, far away from, especially up in the Rockies, you're going to carry weapons because there's bobcats, there's mountain lions, there's bears. You're not necessarily on the top of the pecking order or the food chain. Anyway, long story short, when they raided it, it was the same hostage response team. It was the same hostage negotiator. It was the same sniper. It was the same methods. Everything was exactly the same as it was used in Waco. So then when you go on, let's see, they ended up, finally, the one thing that was different is there was one man who came in and managed to throw a wrench in their plan. They had planned on wiping them all out. And he even admits that many times. He said, I knew I wasn't going to get out of there alive. They were just going to kill us. One man came in. He kind of threw a wrench into their plan. He was a very public figure. And he managed to walk them out. Had it not been for that man, it was probably going to be the same thing as Waco. But then we go on to Waco.
Okay. Now, speaking of Waco, let's talk a little bit about the Waco timeline. So Bridget did a lot of research into the background of the history of the Branch Davidian, and we have a lot more detail here. We're going to kind of go through this rapidly because we're setting the stage for you to understand how these offshoots and the timing of the offshoots when they happened, so that you understand these were not fly-by-night religions from the perspective of, a radical, crazy person that just dreamt up a religion a couple of years later, then they're radicalized and, here we're at. It's not like that at all. The religion began in 1919 with a guy by the name of Victor Houteff, Houteff. He joins the Seventh-day Adventist movement. He was an immigrant from Bulgaria. And in 1934, which is interesting because, of course, everybody that knows anything about Gladio knows that's the arms dealers of the world. In 1934, he is basically disfellowshipped, was the term they used, from the the Adventists,
7-day Adventist.
7 Days Adventist, and he created his own kind of philosophy that was called the Shepherd's Rod, and he wrote in a document. And he moves out to California. Well, he was in California, and interestingly enough, he's in the Riverside, San Bernardino area with him and his wife, because we circle back there several times with the Davidians. So he moves to Waco, and they end up with like 375-acre compound originally. And in 1935, he founded the Davinian Seventh-day Adventist movement. He passes away in 1955 of a heart attack, and his wife, Florence, who was born Florence Marcella Hermanson. And we found her grave in Evergreen Cemetery in Vancouver, Washington, which we thought was hilarious. And she basically had made some predictions, which for some reason they tend to do in this religion, about when the second coming is going to be. And he was 50 when he married her, and she was only 18. So that kind of runs in this church as a theme. In 1937, Benjamin Roden, Roden, is born in 1902 in Bearden, Oklahoma. And at the time, that area was Indian territory. He was from a family that was Jewish. He spent some time working in oil fields, first in Oklahoma and then in Odessa, Texas. He marries a woman by the name of Lois Scott in 1937. He and Scott had 2 daughters and 4 sons. One of their sons is George Roden. And we found in an obituary that it says that he joined the Christian church, and it just has that in parentheses, in the same year that he got married. And as a wedding gift, Lois's mother gave her a publication from the Church of Latter-day Saints, which is Mormons. Many of the Latter-day Saints' beliefs corresponded to those of the Jewish religion. In 1940, they joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Ben accepts the Davidian teaching in 1946, and he basically founds the Branch Davidian, which is a subset of the Davidian church that we were just talking about. So the Seventh-day Adventist it's kind of like a subset of it. You've got like the Seventh-day Adventists, you've got the Davidians, and then you have the Branch Davidians.
Like a splinter off a splinter. Yeah.
She also reports how group members were very strict vegetarians, but they were not vegans. They make sure that you know that. And they always prepared their food in a very simple manner, but very specifically. In 1955, after a power struggle with Florence Houteff, which broke out after Victor's death, because Victor Houteff unexpectedly died at age 69 in 1955 in the midst of a hunting campaign. So Houteff's death was a problem because he had preached to his parishioners that anyone who followed the shepherd's rod couldn't die. So again, you now see why some of this fracturing occurs in these types of splinter churches, because not only did they actually create hard dates in which Jesus was coming back, they also did things like this. So Florence bribed and manipulated to usurp the leadership role in the Davidians, and then Florence claims to have had a vision that the church returns. Another hard date, April 22nd, 1959. Which would have been 42 months after her husband's death. At the time, the Davidians claimed to have about 100,000 members worldwide. And what's really important about this is, and I didn't know this church had people in England, they had people in Australia, they had people in Israel, they had people all over the world. In 1958, Benjamin Roden, his son, George, and his wife went to Israel to prepare the way for people to go to the Holy Land. And by people, they're talking about their church flock. As a result of this mission, the religious news service carried the story. Newspapers and magazines in Israel and America covered this event. So it was a fairly big deal. The Ministry magazine, September 1960, carried the story, quote, "For the first time in the history of the Zionist colonization, an organized Christian group has been granted official status in Israel as recognized immigrants and land settlers with all the rights and material and moral aid involved. A year and a half ago, 5 families of the Seventh-day Adventists from the United States and Canada immigrated to Israel to till the land, build new houses, and prayers conducted by the Adventists have been the first official Christian services to take place throughout the Zionist settlements," unquote. So, first of all, these people are actually Jewish by blood, which was very important because, as Liza has articulated, you had to be Jewish in order to own property there. So this is a very interesting and probably needs a lot more research on this particular component of the story, because as the newspaper reflected, this was the very first time anything like this had ever happened. And we're supposed to believe this is some splinter out in the middle of nowhere wilderness kind of entity achieving the first thing ever happening like this in Israel. So after Florence prophecy came and went without any sign from God, many of the thousands of Davidians who showed up for the big event trickled home, and Brother Roden and those with him were forced by the Davidians to leave the new Mount Carmel. And that happens to be the name of the place that they live. Mount Carmel is the name of the building, the church, the facilities. So you're going to hear that a lot. Roden's own thoughts centered on the significance of the restored state of Israel. In 1958, Benjamin Roden, having warned the Davidians of their approaching disappointment in the coming years, turns his attention to the land of Israel to prepare a place for the people in the time of trouble. The state of Israel at that point is only 10 years old. Ben Roden secures a section of acreage in a newly developed small town called Amerim, Amerim. It happens to be located in northern Israel, and it was based on a prophecy that he was shown in the book of Ezekiel. He helps to establish a vegetarian village based upon a provisional government land grant and purchases a tractor that helps the village grow and prosper. Many of the branch people, including the Roden family, migrated to Israel. The Branch Organic Agricultural Association, abbreviated BOAA, is born in Israel in 1958 with a land grant from the Israeli government. With the assistance of the village of Abram, it's recognized by the government of Israel as the first Christian Zionist settlement to establish roots in Israel. It's almost like they're using them for something. In 1962, Florence and other executive members resign, taking $5,000 each, and leave the rest of the property and assets to be distributed by the attorneys. Most of the property ends up owned by a Double E ranch, but the Branch Davidian, which is the splinter of the splinter, as Bridget said, held on to 72 acres that included all of the buildings. In 1962, the lawyer representing the estate of the Davidians and Ben Roden begins a massive court battle where a judge attempts to evict the families, including the Rodens, from the 77 acres, which ends up on appeal. And after the appeal, it was tied up in courts for 7 years. Roden won control of the Davidians, which is now known as the Branch Davidians. For the next 15 years, he led the group along with a theological path that kind of fit him. Ben Roden made an initial down payment of $2,500 for property on Tom Street and raised another $25,000 in escrow for the purchase price. Even before the resignations of 1962, one sizable group of about 100 had moved back to Riverside, California, which is where we told you they had come from originally, where the substantial 7-day Adventist presence was already established there. Another Davidian group existing still to this day in Waco, though returning there only after periods in Jamaica and New York, has a better claim to continuity with the Davidian 7-day Adventists of Victor and Florence than this group that we're talking about. In 1973, Ben Roden persuades the Waco-based county attorney or county court presiding Judge Loog that the remaining 77 acres actually belong to the remaining second tithers at the Davidians. So important thing, they had 3 tithes they gave every year. They gave like a percentage of their income, then they had second tithers, and then they had third tithers. And that's what they're referring to in this statement. Those who had record of paying a 20% of their income to the Davidian headquarters during the life and ministry. And that's what they call that second tier of tithers. They gave a substantial portion of their assets to the church. So this is where the Davidians and Branch Davidians come distinctly different groups. And we also know there was kind of a chasm in the timeline when we were doing our research. There's a guy in 1976 by the name of Mosi Dayan. And he is Mosi Dayan the group or a person?
Moshe Dayan. He was the Moshe Dayan was the head of the Israeli intelligence army services, and he was actually responsible for destroying the USS Liberty.
And he actually is the one that created the Zionist paramilitary organization that operated, and how do you pronounce that one, Liza? Yeshuv? YISHUV. In the British Mandate of Palestine, before it was even a state. This guy was basically in charge of their paramilitary, like their Operation Gladio style units. He also created a special night squad, almost like werewolf unit, during the Arab revolt in Palestine. Again, this is all pre-Israel. And he later lost an eye to a sniper raid in Lebanon during World War II. So he became, as Liza just talked about, the defense minister just before the 1967 Six-Day War, and was in charge when the Liberty got attacked. And just so that everybody, he wasn't just in charge, he's the one that actually ordered the attack. Let's see. He was actually born in what was then the Ottoman Syria within the Ottoman Empire. And his parents, oddly enough, is from Ukraine. So again, you just keep seeing these circles around everything. He was not an actual Judaism adherent. He was an atheist. He is Jewish ethnically, not religiously. He had a hero that he constantly was quoted as idolizing by the name of Major General Wingate. And Wingate is the guy that created the unconventional military kind of surprise tactics for Britain. And he was assigned to the mandatory Palestine between World War I and World War II. This British Major General is one of the ones that came down that oversaw much of their terror attacks that we've talked about before in other shows that dealt with the Mafia of Jerusalem and how they were pitting the Jewish people against the Muslim people in order to create chaos down there. So this is one of the leading guys of the British military that's down overseeing this. And this guy that we're talking about is he idolizes him. So two peas in a pod. The British general becomes a supporter of Zionism and sets up a joint British-Jewish counterinsurgency unit. And he served in the this Jewish guy that goes on to be the IDF director, served as one of Wingate's special night squad / Gladio operatives. So we just found that very interesting. He also travels, interestingly enough, to Waco and the British IDF chief. He is a guest at Baylor University. And what we found very interesting about this story is because obviously anybody that's been to Waco knows Baylor University is a big Christian university there. And they have lots of ties to Masonic lodges. There's more Masonic lodges in Waco than I've seen in any town its size ever. And also all of the papers of this entire church, both the Davidian church and the Branch Davidian church, was given to Waco or to Baylor, and they are in the Baylor library. You can go there and check them out. All of the writings, everything that they ever did religiously is on file in the Baylor library, which we found very interesting too. So in the spring of 1977, the elder Roden and his son George returned to Israel. October 1978, just days after the family returned from a visit to Washington, D.C. for the Autumn Council, Ben Roden gets admitted to the hospital. He was 78 years old. He was in very good health at the time, very active, but within the day, he was dead. And on his death certificate, it says he died from a pulmonary embolism. So his wife, Lois, assumes ledership. And I don't know, is Liza still there?
She's, I think, backstage.
Okay. I didn't know if she wanted to say anything. Oh, there she is. Did you want to say anything, Liza, about the Roden and him passing away as far as how he related to Israel? I guess not.
Are you on mute, Liza Lou?
Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to any of that, Bridget?
Well, there's several different connections there where he ends up getting buried over in Israel, which again, they have a very strict laws, and again, Liza's much better on this, but
you're talking about Ben. We're not to George yet.
Right.
Okay.
Ben was buried they actually buried him and then exhumed him and moved him over to Israel and reburied him. And that's not something that anyone can do. You have to be as I understand it, not just a Jew by birth, but a Jew by maternal parentage in order to be able to do that.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
Thank
we can hear
you.
you now.
Yep.
I have no idea what that was about. Um,
About him
Old
getting
phone.
buried over there.
Bridget is, yeah, yes, they are not going to let you get buried over there unless you're considered a Jewish citizen, and that always goes by the mother, it never goes by the father. Um, Now, I'm sorry, I did have a technical difficulty. You're talking about, because both Rodins, one, George wanted to go back to Israel, and are we
But we're
there
just
yet?
talking about Ben right now. Ben died.
Okay, okay, yes, he would have had to have been Jewish in order to be buried there.
Okay.
Right.
So now we've got
Which goes along with all of his teachings. Actually, Benjamin, all of his teachings, after he took over control of the Branch Davidians, everything was observing all of the Jewish holidays, all of the Jewish feasts, all of the he brought all that with him and essentially Jewishized the Seventh-day Adventists, which is why he got kicked out of the Seventh-day Adventists.
okay. So his wife Lois assumes leadership of the Branch Davidian sect. Her distinctive teaching centered around a female character of the Holy Spirit and an ordination of women. And in 1978, the 17-year-old high school dropout Vernon Howell, who we all know as David Koresh, that is actually not his name. His name is Vernon Howell. He begins attending the Seventh-day Adventist church. His mother happened to have been raised in a church, not this church, but a Seventh-day Adventist church. And you want to go through his background real quick, Bridget?
Sure. Now, one of the things we've talked about in the past where they target certain types of people whenever they're doing like MK Ultra type things, and he is just ripe for the picking. He was born to his mother was 14 years old when she got pregnant with him. She ended up going ahead and having the baby, and the man was supposed to be marrying her, married another girl. She ends up jockeying into this weird where she takes the little kid, she marries a man who's actually out on prison, just got out of prison, and right after that, he was abusive physically and mentally. At some point, she finally decided that the best thing would be to take little Vernon and give him and all the custody to her mother. So the mother ends up taking over custody. However, the man that her mother was married to also was not her father and didn't have any emotional attachment. So again, the boy ends up in this constant struggle of estrangement when she finally meets a very interesting and elusive character that I could not find hardly anything on. And his name, let's see here, which I don't have in my notes. Anyway,
Just keep going.
he ended up getting married. She got married to her eventual long-term relationship and decided to retake control of the baby, or now he's 6, and they end up having their own child, and he ends up going back and forth between his grandmother and his mother over the next until he turns 17 years old. And at that point, he finally gets to where he's a junior in high school and he drops out. He just decides he just so happened to be playing music on his guitar His mother talked about getting him a cheap guitar when he was younger. And so he decides he's going to leave town and go to Los Angeles and become a musician. At this point, he disappears for a couple of years. There's several different timelines that are given, but at this point, and again, it goes back to, it reminds me of the same MK Ultra that was working with Manson. Because wasn't Manson the same one that was also playing a guitar?
Yes, not only did he play a guitar, he obviously played in a band. And oh, by the way, he happened to be between San Francisco and Laurel Canyon all the time, which is just outside of Los Angeles, which is just outside of San Bernardino, which is exactly where all these people hung out. So keep going.
Right. And then he spontaneously shows up down in Texas. At that point, when he does, now his mother was raised Seventh-day Adventist, but she never really went to church very often or did anything with him. However, that's where he shows up. And just like his predecessors before him, he starts out there, spends a couple of years there, and ends up, ends up getting disfellowshipped because he tells the pastor of the church or the preacher, that he wants to have a baby and he wants to get married to his, I think at the time it was 14-year-old daughter. So now you see this rehashing of the same 14-year-old keeps coming back. Again, he ends up getting disfellowship, so he ends up going and researching about these branch Davidians teachings, where he comes over and he comes underneath the group of Lois.
Okay. So in 1979, there's a power struggle between Lois,
Right.
remember that's Ben's wife, and George, their son, for the church. And it gets so bad, there ends up being a restraining order and a lawsuit. So George, the son, loses the case in the Waco courts, and he's forced to move his mobile home off of the Mount Carmel estate. And he and his family moved to their own newly acquired plot near Waco. Lois Roden has universally been recognized as the head of the membership at this facility. So George frequently visits his mother at Mount Carmel during this time, or since his time that he departed and his dad died. So in 1981, George accompanied his mother to Jerusalem to take Ben Roden's body to Israel for his final resting place. That summer, Vernon Howell arrived at Mount Carmel, and he was visiting for the first time. Obviously, he must have liked it a lot. So Vernon Howell ends up sleeping with Lois Roden. Now, there's a huge age difference because she's about 60 and he's 22. Okay, just so that y'all know that. And George obviously has been out of shape. He's been disenfranchised from the church and had to move off of it. And now this guy has moved in on his mom. So he filed a lawsuit claiming that Howell / Koresh had raped his mother and that it had resulted in a pregnancy. That was actually the lawsuit. There's no sign that she actually had a child, but that was his claim.
Now, can I pause you for one moment? I think Liza's backstage, because this is a really interesting point that sort of comes into play. Remember, we were talking about the maternal
She isn't
link.
backstage.
Oh, okay. The maternal link of the Jewish trait. If that child was born and Lois was a citizen of Israel, which we know she was over there buying the property with Benjamin, it would end up with a default of David Koresh would end up with a type of, Liza, you got it? Is it parental citizenship or something along those lines? Just because that, and he actually filed a federal court saying that he raped her, and but George was, well, a little bit off his rocker anyway.
As we're
But-
going to find out.
Yeah,
So,
sorry.
let me see, make sure she's, yeah. I put her on stage, so I don't know what's going on with her.
Yeah.
Are you
all right.
here? Can you hear me again?
Yeah,
Yep.
we're here.
There you are.
Hello? Okay, I just want to apologize to everybody. My phone is actually overheating. I don't know what that's all about, so I do apologize.
Okay. Did you want to say anything else about, we got to the part where Vernon Howe had the affair. George sued him saying that he had raped the mom and she was pregnant, and they go to Israel together. The suspicion was that they were trying to actually deliver the baby, if there was one over there.
No, that
No.
sounds about right.
Okay.
No,
All right.
I mean, the Australian was the one that called him out, though, right, Bridget?
Yes,
The
right.
Australian was the one that called the Israeli consulate. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
that was weird.
So by 1983, Vernon Howe / Caress had assumed control over the Branch Davidian group with Lois's support. In the 1984/85 timeframe, George Roden forced David Koresh, we're going to start using that name now, and his followers off the property at gunpoint. So they end up purchasing some land nearby in Palestine, Texas. Crazy. Where he and some followers lived in buses and basically plywood boxes, since he had just temporarily been kicked off. But Koresh during this time is traveling all the time. He's going to Australia. He's going to California. And you get the distinct impression that there's something else going on here. We don't know what, and we're not making any allegations, but this is not normal for someone who doesn't have a job. Just saying. So while visiting in Israel, he goes to basically all over Israel as well. David Koresh's mother's biography, Koresh made, according to her biography, he makes multiple long trips to Australia, multiple lengthy trips to Israel and to San Bernardino. Now, what's important about this is we do have some clips of a film. You are going to hear people with all kinds of nationalities speaking in these films that did survive, and some of them were clips of other times. So I found that part fascinating. One of those trips to Israel was an attempt. Okay, so now Koresh has gotten married, and his wife is pregnant with their firstborn, Cyrus.
And she was 14 as well.
And his wife that he married was 14.
Right.
And now she's pregnant, and he takes her over there again to try to have the baby in Israel.
Roden, 2 weeks before she gives birth, the Israeli consulate is notified by a previous Davidian who is actually living in Australia, and they get a hold of Israel and kick him out of the country before she can give birth. She ends up coming back to California. At that point, is really dodgy because all these other people are living in buses and boxes, and David and his wife are up living in a home in San Bernardino.
Yeah. So Lois Roden dies in 1986. She also is buried in Israel. And the power struggle between Koresh and Lois's son, George, resumes. And George Roden basically digs up a dead body that was buried in the Davidian cemetery and challenges Koresh to leadership of the church over who can resurrect this dead body first. Not kidding. So Koresh goes and reports George for being a psycho to the local police for abuse of a corpse. The police say, no, we can't do anything. We need proof. So then David Koresh and several of his fellow bus dwellers sneak back over to Mount Carmel with guns, and they're going to go in and basically take pictures of the dead body. So they end up getting into a gunfight. Roden is shot in the chest and hand, and they end up, let's see, WACO lawyers who were present at Howell's trial still recall the moment that he displayed his control over his followers. Basically, the Branch Davidians wouldn't stand up, and he turned around and told them it was fine if they could stand up. And so then they all stand up. And so it was supposed to depict that they were all brainwashed. He and his followers went on trial for attempted murder. The 7 were acquitted, and Koresh's case ended in a mistrial. Sometime for attempted murder, sorry. Sometime in 1987, Koresh begins paying back taxes on different parts of the Mount Carmel property that was being threatened to be foreclosed. And again, where are they getting all this money? This was also the same time that Koresh claimed to have received a revelation that he began taking more wives and to have more children. So basically, he is told that he needs to have 24 children. And he does his dangdest to get there. The Branch Davidians accepted this even when many of his wives were children, to include the youngest one being 12. In March 1988, George Roden was jailed for 9 months under contempt of court for threatening to curse a judge with diseases for violating the 1979 judgment. So where he was ordered to leave the property and stop calling himself the leader of the Branch Davidians, because obviously Koresh had been performing that job. So George Roden, after his release, moved into a duplex that had been owned by his parents in Odessa. By October 1989, George Roden killed a man by the name of Wayman Del Adair. Now, this guy's very interesting too, because everybody around him, this Adair guy, basically talked about him traveling to South America all around the same times that there were drug running and gladio operations going on down there.
Just a coincidence, I'm sure.
Just a coincidence.
And he
and
was also a Nazi.
He was also a Nazi.
Yeah,
which of course fits perfectly in with the whole Operation Gladio scenario.
Right.
So he basically shows up and confronted George, supposedly, according to George, with a gun and a hatchet, saying that he had been sent by Koresh to assassinate George, but George kills him. So George is later found not guilty by reason of insanity. He ends up getting convicted or sentenced to a mental hospital, which it really weird. He breaks out of it 3 times. The last time he shows up at the Israeli consulate in New York City and says he wants to go to Israel. They returned him to the insane asylum. So by 1990, Koresh had become the leader of the Branch Davidians and legally changed his name, saying on the court document that the change was for publicity and business purposes. He had said that the switch was from his belief that he was now the biblical head of David. He adopts David as King David and Koresh for Cyrus the Great, a Persian king. It should be noted at this point that the child abuse charges leveled against the group stem from a Newsweek article, which, just saying up front, Newsweek is a CIA front Mockingbird Media publication, and the extent to which it occurred needs to be reassessed. However, it did occur from a legal sense, since Howell and Koresh married at, well, first of all, let's just say this. When he married the 12-year-old, that definitely helped her, counted as whatever, a sex crime. In the state of Texas at this time, it was legal with parental approval to marry a 14-year-old. As bizarre as that sounds, it was legal. So the only questionable act at this point that we have is his marriage to the 12-year-old. We didn't find any documentation that that even occurred. We're just told that it does. So take that for what it's worth. But the whole thing is weird, and I'm going to say that up front. Howard Koresh is claimed to have fathered Robin Bunn's child when she was 17, and to have had sex with his wife's younger sister when she was 12. He also had an affair with Robin Bunn's mother, Janine, when she was 50. There is also a confessional testimony from Carrie Jewell, who testified she was raped at 10, but there's a lot of questions around that one. A lot of questions. However, you do get the distinct impression that David Koresh was planning a baby farm kind of capability here, where he was going to be the paternal sole provider of this baby farm. And it begins to look a lot like the John of God situation, and also John of God. I'm sure that he was affiliated with some kind of a religious sect, just saying. And also the Epstein baby farm that was rumored to have been in the offing in New Mexico as well. So there's just a lot here. When you start looking at it in hindsight, like we are, it just takes on a completely different character. So they preached.
I was just say, this was exactly what Epstein's dream was. I mean, he spoke about it, that he wanted a whole group of women to have his babies.
Yes.
And this is exactly what happened.
So just like with that other one that we started off with, they, the Branch Davidians preached a fear of end times coming. So it is almost, if we're going to go down the cult road, I would say this was like a psychological operation in order to basically, what they did was extort money from people, because people came here that was very wealthy and basically ended up giving everything they had to the church. The preaching of end times, I've looked into this from Africa, from South America, here in the United States. There are these sects that do this and basically extort money from everybody out of this fear tactic. Now, whether they're doing it just to enrich themselves, or whether they're doing it with a benefactor in the CIA under a psychological operations program, I don't know. But I will tell you, in looking through the history of this organization and the traveling around and many of the other things, I now question many of the different narratives that we've been told about this.
And see, that you're dead on. In fact, one of the things that came up during one of those trials, when all the people came in, all the Branch Davidians came in to support him when he was on trial for shooting George, the judge asked them all to stand to be sworn in.
We talked about that.
I was going to say, it was just eerie, the type of control, mind control that they had, that he had on these people, because he was taking people's wives with them, like, accepting it and endorsing it, I mean, it was just bizarre.
Yeah, very bizarre. All right. So there are several U.S. branches of this type of cult mentalities. Oh, I already said that about the Africa thing. It just does seem like kind of a coincidence, if you will, which we don't believe in, of all of these things that look just like this going on all over the world. He preached that there would be a mighty war between in the U.S. and that the U.S. would invade Israel and bring about Armageddon. Koresh believed himself to be a warrior angel. He developed a plan A, which was to go to Israel and fight. And then a plan B was to stay in the U.S. and the U.S. Army would attack and bring about the end of the world. As you begin to track Koresh, he traveled extensively. We already made the point that, you know, he's a guitar player. He's a high school dropout, but he's traveling all over. He purchased that plot of land in Palestine. And he travels back and forth to Southern California all the time.
Right.
So some of the bizarre activities of the church under the reign of Koresh were annulling all marriages except for his own. This resulted in people like Mark Beralt leaving for Australia and basically setting up his own branch of the Branch Davidian. He also buried a bus at the back of the facilities as a protection bunker and stored food and ammo in it.
And that all has Manson traits. Everything from the traveling to San Bernardino, Liza's texting in, and she said that all the buses, Manson traveled, the Manson family was living out of buses. I mean, the coincidences here are just insane.
Right. The majority were American, 84 of them. 31 of them were British, 5 were Australian, and 2 were from Canada. 1 was from Israel. However, they were all basically multiracial, and many of them, not all of them were multiracial. There were a lot of them that were, though. In 1993, the ATF says that there was a UPS package. This is the big excuse. Okay, so now we're getting to the actual heart of the matter. The ATF says that there was a UPS package that broke open that was addressed to Mount Carmel that had grenade casings. Now, I looked through a lot of the congressional testimony, and at no point did I ever see an actual label, which you would have had for evidence of who sent the package that supposedly had grenade casings that broke open, because nowhere in the facility were there actual grenades. So this could be just be a story as a precursor to them to have entry into the compound. But also one of the things we found out in this research is they actually had gun license to be gun dealers. They went to gun shows all the time. So the fact that they had a large supply, and they argue it wasn't large, but if they had a supply of guns in Mount Carmel, it's called inventory. As a matter of fact, one of the guys you'll see on this video was at a gun show when the initial raid happened. So that part of the story is crazy. So at the same time, the ATF, let's see, the same ATF that was complicit with arms shipments in and out of Mena, Arkansas. Those guys are traveling, you know, taking guns everywhere. And because David Koresh had 20, you know, he's a criminal.
Right.
The irony here is crazy. So a random guy, supposedly a random guy by the name of David Thibodeau, he just shows up and he's going to be doing like an apprentice with David Koresh, and he's hanging out at the local guitar center. And I think that was in Hollywood, California, where they run across him. So David Koresh is out in California. Supposedly And they come across this guy. Well, it turns out that isn't Thibodeau the guy that's the ATF informant?
He is the one who testified against everybody else in the after trial, after the burning of the building.
Yeah, he's the guy that tipped him off. He's the guy that said that when the so let's get to this part. I'm not sure when it comes up, but we're going to get to this part right now. So when the ATF decides to pounce on the Koresh compound, they must have called the media, because a media person's driving around on the roads and happened to find a mailman and says, "Hey, where's the Mount Carmel at?" The mailman happens to be the brother of David Koresh's wife. So David, the brother, runs back to the Branch Davidian compound and says, "Hey, I just talked to the media and they're sending a raid party here." And so that was the heads up. Well, Thibodeau, who just so happens to meet these guys out in California and then comes back. So the whole thing's a setup. You can see it coming. So Thibodeau is hanging out in the Mount Carmel facilities when the Koresh brother-in-law comes running in and says, "Hey, they're going to come get you." And he slips away for breakfast and calls the command post and says, "Hey, they know you're coming. Don't come. Call it off. We need to reschedule this." Well, he's overruled, and they actually decide to go ahead with the raid.
And I tell you why, because that was the last day, the expiration date on the ATF's warrant was the day they did it.
Correct.
February 28th. Now, one of the things that I have talked to Liza about quite a bit is if you're going to surprise somebody, you do it like they did it with Roger Stone. You show up at 5 o'clock in the morning or 3:30 in the morning in the dark. You catch people half asleep so that you catch and startle them. That's part of their handbook. That's what they've always done. They didn't raid this place until 10 o'clock in the morning.
Hold on, Bridget. Hold on.
Yeah.
I'm going to back you up just a second here.
Okay.
You could do what you did with Roger Stone, because by that time, even the camera crews had night vision goggles and could actually film things with the technology. True. Back then, you had to wait till the sun came up.
Right.
Okay. And there wasn't all these fancy gadgets. So they could have done that, but that's not why they wanted to do it. They're trying to justify a bigger budget. So they have to do it in broad daylight so the media can come film it for them.
Well, and side note, it just so happened that the ATF, CIA, FBI, Sheriff's Office was working with one of the media groups to roll out a big production called The Sinful Messiah on David Koresh, just like they did in Ruby Ridge, where they started running all those articles long before they ever raided Ruby Ridge. The newspapers were running The Sinful Messiah almost a month before they actually did this raid. They're trying to brainwash people into accepting that this is a cult, this is a dangerous cult, and to justify the force they know they're going to use. It's Mockingbird Media.
Right. And so we've set the stage. Obviously, we're just fresh off of Ruby Ridge. And now we're going into the WACO scenario. And interestingly enough, Timothy McVeigh shows up in WACO during the standoff period.
Just a coincidence.
And then when he does his thing in Oklahoma, he actually says that Ruby Ridge and WACO is the reason he's doing what he did. So there you have it. All right. So we've set the predicate here. On the morning of February 28th, that's the day of the initial raid. We talked to you about the mailman and how all of that went down. There's Texas Rangers involved. There's ATF. And this primarily was an ATF raid, just like Ruby Ridge initially was the ATF. And then they screwed it up so bad, as they did here, that they have to then call in the FBI. Now, I can make the argument that that wasn't necessarily a screw up. That was meant to happen because we are setting narratives here. And by the way, there's not anybody that is that incompetent, even in our government. Sorry, just not. So, and again, David Koresh was out in the public all the time. If they wanted to give him a warrant and not go through this whole mess and blow up this entire scenario with all of this standoff time and all this other stuff, they could have picked any time of the day. Did we not just spend the last hour telling you he traveled everywhere? Yeah. He was at the airport all the time. There's no way they could not have given him a warrant at some point outside of this venue.
He even jogged right past their undercover, quote, undercover compound. He would stop in and eat pizza and drink beer with the undercover agents that were staying at right across from the compound for surveilling him. He hung out with them. He even had the sheriff's department, the sheriff, out on his facility within the month prior to the raid to shoot guns, to target shoot. I mean, there was only one reason, I should say, that the raid happened. And that was, this was the plan. What happened was the plan. It had Correct. Nothing to do with arresting him safely or keeping, one of the biggest things they went on and on about was keeping the children safe.
So, there's some other people that were complicit in the local media, the radio station, the television station. I'm not going to go through all of their comments, but also they told us that one of the guys readily admitted that he had confirmed that he had gotten a tip from his girlfriend who worked at the medical transport, who was told to be alert that there was something going down. So, you know, it's a small town. I don't know if you guys have been to WACO. I've been to WACO. It's a small town. Everybody knows each other. So I want to play real quick. Let me see if I can bring this up. I'm really taxing my capability here. So let's see if we can do it. All right.
Do you believe that Koresh was the Messiah?
I think he was a Messiah.
The allegations of child abuse and instances of violence in the past are these things generally consistent with the religious groups that you've studied?
The pattern of allegations is a very familiar one. I mean, the way people describe what was going on inside convents sounds an awful lot like what we hear people describing going on inside the Branch Davidians, or what people thought, as was referred to earlier, about what was going on with the Mormons in their early history. I think it's very important for us both to take those allegations seriously in the sense of actually investigating them, but also to realize that there is this predictable pattern once a group has decided that they want to live very differently and see the rest of us as wrong, that we're also likely to respond with a variety of kinds of fears and expectations and exaggerations.
So you can make the argument, obviously, that is what was going on at the time. So let me get out of here and go back. So I can't believe I just pulled that off. I'm so impressed with myself. I'm just going to say that out loud. I'm so bad at this. All right. So Attorney Janet Reno's office in Washington is at this point going to get involved because they've launched the raid. And let's see. There was a lawsuit that said that the employees of the 3 companies that were responsible for tipping off the Davidians, i.e. the radio stations and all those, about the raid was quickly joined by dozens of other ATFers. All of these 3 defendants denied wrongdoing. Their legal defense relied on the fact that the ATF stormed the compound even after they had lost the element of surprise. Nonetheless, the case was eventually settled out of court for like $15 million. The money was divided among the more than 6 dozen ATF agents and their survivors, and the attorneys. So nothing for the Branch Davidians, but the idiots who, after losing the element of surprise, do some really stupid tactical things, and they file a lawsuit against the media chick that asked for directions, and they get money. They get millions of dollars. So
Right.
that part is that borderlines on craziness right there. All right, so let me find our next clip.
And the fact that they tried the survivors.
Oh, well, yeah, we're not even to that part yet.
Right, right.
That gets even worse. All right, so here's the next clip. Let's see. Where to go? All right, here we go. So we're going to share that, and I need to get up here to 32. Let's see. Y'all are going to love these people again.
Execute a search warrant on that house to obtain those illegal weapons.
In addition, it had reason to believe that Koresh and his followers might pose a danger not only to themselves, but to the surrounding community.
I think in the case of the Davidians, if people had listened carefully to their rhetoric with an ear toward an understanding of religious apocalyptic language, would probably not have been worried about them using these weapons against their neighbors.
In a word, what the search warrant found was gun parts. It was the duty of the ATF to show that those gun parts were owned with an intent to create illegal weapons. I'm not a lawyer or a judge, but my reading of the warrant does not convince me that that intent was there.
Do you say it's not been proven that there were 48 illegal machine guns and a bunch of illegal hand grenades on his compound?
I believe there were 48 illegal automatic weapons on April the 19th. I don't know that that's the case on February 28th, sir.
I see, but there were weapons there.
Yes.
How about hand grenades? Was there testimony about that? Or were they just...
I don't know. I don't recall that.
Do you recall, Mr. DeGuerin?
No, I don't know any.
Even though you know every other detail about the trial.
That's not fair, Mr. Schumer.
You doubt that there were 48 illegal weapons and
I've
hand
never
grenades
said
there?
I knew all the details of the trial.
Do you
I've never
doubt that? I'm
said he
asking you
was
that
peaceful.
right now, sir.
What is your question?
My question is, do you have doubts that Mr. Koresh had on his compound illegal weapons and illegal hand grenades? Do
No,
you
he
have any
took-
doubts about that?
No, he
Thank
told me he had illegal
Okay.
weapons
Do you
there.
have
He did
doubts
not tell me that he had hand grenades there.
I see.
And I saw
Okay.
no hand grenades. I did see some grenades that the ATF had thrown in, and I brought one out.
What do you
to
mean thrown in?
The ATF threw in grenades in their
No, they
dynamic
didn't throw
entry.
any
Mr.
grenades in, as I
Yes, they
understand
did.
it.
I
were
brought one out.
They were flashbacks. They did
Have you
not
ever seen what a flashbang can do to somebody? It's a grenade. It has an explosive charge in it. It's very dangerous. It can blow your hand off. It can blow your face off. It can kill. I would have brought out some of the unexpended grenades that the ATF threw in, but I was worried about bringing out a live grenade, so I left them there. There were a number of grenades.
Okay, Mr. DeGuerin, I think that would hamper your credibility because you're the first person who would say that those were grenades. I've never really sat through a hearing the likes of yesterday. 6.5 hours of defense lawyers, their marathons, their ways of sliding over the truth was very unfortunate. This idea of the FBI having hand grenades, not flashbangs, but hand grenades. And finally, coup de grace, Mr. DeGuerin said flashbangers can kill, injure, maim. Anyone who knows anything about these things knows they can't.
Mr. Kavanaugh, I have in my hand here amount of Play-Doh. Mr. Bush, if you could, this is just standard Play-Doh. If that were a flashbang grenade or a stun grenade, the same thing, which was live, which pin had been pulled, would you feel comfortable just holding that in your hand?
Well, Mr. Barr, a flashbang grenade, my answer is no. I would not want to hold it.
Those are classified as destructive devices under 26 U.S.C. Section 5845F, aren't they?
Yes, sir, they are.
That they can kill people. Is that true?
Certainly, yes, sir.
Well, a gentleman by the name of Warren L. Parker, an explosives enforcement officer, Bureau of ATF, on May 11, 1994, in court, said under oath that they are designed to help kill the suspect while not endangering the law enforcement officer when they're used for those purposes.
I'd like to focus on the search warrant. First, it was put together, as a number of witnesses have testified, in a prejudicial and inflammatory manner. And second, it clearly misstates the U.S. Code statute number for the offense charged, and I think makes other technical mistakes in the law, which means to me it was put together in a sloppy fashion. Now, you put together inflammatory with sloppy, that translates to me that ATF was in a hurry to make a big splash with something.
Okay, so that kind of sets the stage and begins to hold on just a second. Begins to explain some of the background that we found. And I know everybody loves seeing Schumer. Makes my skin crawl. And again, as he always does, makes an ass out of himself. Oh my gosh, let me just laugh at this guy because he doesn't know anything about what he's talking about. And then the very next day, the government official comes back and says the defense attorney said everything that was actually true. And you, Chuck Schumer, didn't know what the hell you were talking about. So I find the irony in that delicious, actually.
Right. And the one thing to bring up, I want to bring up for sure, and this came out of Ruby Ridge and was also used in Waco. During Ruby Ridge, for the first time ever, the ATF, FBI established a, quote, rules for engagement. And when they did that, it was epic because for the first time, they had Washington actually approve that they could shoot anyone in Ruby Ridge. They said an adult male holding a weapon. When they did, they actually shot several times when the woman was had her baby and was feeding her baby. So there was no weapon involved. But one of the biggest questions that came up at all these trials was, what were the rules of engagement? Because everybody knew they brought the same weapons. They used the same material. They used the same head of the hostage rescue, the same head of the FBI, the same characters. And they went further with it with Waco.
All right, so let's resume some of our video.
Go ahead.
Mr. Hartnett, there's a rumor, and surely it's unfounded, that the publicity person or public relations person for ATF had released some kind of a press communication the night before to media around the country that something big was going to come down in Texas.
Yes, and we heard that, and she called a reporter to ask if he was going to be in.
Why did she do that?
She wanted to be able to get a hold of them if there was a story and they recovered these arms.
Wouldn't it be ample time after they were recovered?
Oh, yes. I mean,
what happened is that I contacted Channel 8 and Channel 5 in Dallas. I just said we might have something going on here in Dallas this weekend, and I'd like to have a weekend contact number, and that's what I was given.
What was the purpose of contacting them? Were you actually seeking publicity for the agency?
Absolutely not, sir.
Okay, maybe then I don't understand the purpose for contacting them.
With its appropriations hearings a week away, a large successful raid would produce major positive headlines to counter the ATF's reputation as a rogue agency whose debacles blackened the reputation of other agencies. And it would scare the public enough about fringe groups to create political pressure on Congress to increase its budget.
At least part of the ATF motivation, even if it never rose to the surface of discussion, was to enforce the morals of our society, to enforce the psyche of right thinking by retaliating against these odd people.
Let me just ask Mr. Moulton, was there a cover-up?
Absolutely not. Not by the Treasury Department in the preparation of that report, absolutely not.
Do you agree with that comment?
No, I don't.
Why?
I feel that the Treasury Department has said things since the time of the raid at WACO that have been incorrect. It also had many omissions, distortions, and false statements in it.
And why do you believe those omissions and false statements are in that report?
I believe that they were concerned about the fallout from the media.
Were these agents knowingly outgunned before they started?
We weren't outgunned at WACO, that's for sure.
Almost 100 agents spent 3 days in dress rehearsals at Fort Hood, Texas, all at U.S. Army expense.
In order for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to have obtained the military assistance they did receive, not because of the Posse Comitatus Act, but because of existing military policy, they misrepresented to the military that this was an anti-drug raid when it was never an anti-drug raid.
Unfortunately, there are many people who still, when they speak to me about WACO, say, well, those people were involved in drugs. And there's no evidence that Koresh was or that any of these people were.
As practicing lawyers, we know that usually judges rubber stamp the applications for search warrant.
The Fourth Amendment guarantees the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. Ironically, a charred copy of the very amendment was found in the debris at WACO.
All right, I'm going to stop that there because I want to say a couple of things here. This was in our investigation into this was the first time that I had ever heard the fact that the ATF between February and April 19th staged exercises and dry runs of a raid at Fort Hood. That's critical. That's technically not allowed. And what's really not allowed is anytime something like that happens, the United States Army is not allowed to give any funding, which would have happened because they were using their facility, to the government in the execution of their duty. So there's everything wrong with what they just said. But I want to go to a step further. And this is going to literally bake your bagels here. So I'm going to share with y'all a little story. The guy that was the commander at Fort Hood, we're going to look him up real quick here. And I'm going to tell you his name. His name is General Wesley Clark. At the time, he was not, he may have been a 1-star. But let me give you a little bit of background on General Wesley Clark, because you're going to recognize immediately. He was a Rhodes Scholar at the University of Oxford. He was the NATO commander, you know, the one that runs all of the Operation Gladio programs, after he was at WACO. Apparently, this WACO test for him was what qualified him to go on to be the NATO commander, because as a good steward of this international syndicate, he made sure that he made himself available to be a patsy for these people that were about ready to murder Americans. So let me read this to you. Clark's father's family was Jewish. His paternal grandparents, Jacob, Connie, And of course, he's a name changer too. His actual real name is Wesley Connie, Kanne. He was later adopted by his mother's new husband. So Clark's father's family, his father's parents is Jacob Connie and Ida Goldman, who immigrated from Belarus, i.e. Russia at the time. And his father was named Benjamin Jacob Connie, and he went to school in Chicago and went into World War I. He was a delegate at the DNC in 1932 and helped elect FDR. And let's see, Clark's son, his mother was a Methodist, and let's see, they moved to Little Rock, Arkansas, which is basically where he was raised. And that's where he was adopted on his 16th birthday by his mom's new husband. And let's see. That about does it. I think it's very interesting that he fits. Oh, no, wait, hold on. He also was in Vietnam and involved in several of the counterinsurgent raids there. He was shot while he was in Vietnam. And let's see. Oh, here's the other one. He was good friends with Alexander Haig, which is a huge issue for me. But that kind of gives you an idea. And it does say on his wiki page that he was at Fort Hood. And you guys will remember him. I didn't realize it, but he was at Southern Command too, which Southern Command is in charge of all the drug trade down in South America. And it was under his leadership that we went to war in Bosnia. He was in charge during that entire time. And that was a fiasco, by the way. And used Operation Gladio while he was the NATO commander. So he definitely has Gladio written all over him from that perspective. And so I wanted to fill that in, and I'm going to go to our next clip that Liza had already mentioned. Let me pull it up here real quick. Trying to get it to the right places part.
About the time I got there, David came in from the other side, different side of the room, and came in and said that they'd heard that somebody was coming, and he wanted everybody to remain calm and go back to their rooms and just stay cool. He would go down the front door and talk to them.
You're with Koresh, correct? He gets very nervous. Did you request that the raid be called off because the element of surprise had been lost?
Yes, sir. I arrived at the command post, and the first thing I asked was, "Where's Chuck? Where's Chuck?" And they advised me that he had left. At that time, I started yelling, and I said, "Why? Why? They know we're coming. They know we're coming."
I did not feel he knew that we were coming at that time. When I talked with Robert, like I testified before, I took notes while we were talking over the thing, and I've read all of Robert's statements. Robert did a great job, but I think everything that you heard by his testimony was not passed on to me.
Those two men know what I told them, and they knew exactly what I meant. And instead of coming up and admitting to the American people right after the raid that they had made a mistake, that the element of surprise had been lost, that the agent had advised them that they knew they were coming, instead of doing that, they lied to the public, and in doing so, it just about destroyed a very great agency.
This is the guy
The
that told him
helicopters
that
were
they
to arrive
had lost
first
the
at the
element of
rear of Mount
surprise.
Carmel and divert the Davidians' attention from the ATF agents moving in on the ground from the front.
So these clowns in these helicopters are distracting everybody, flying around in the back with their thumbs up like sycophants, and they're getting ready to raid the front.
Approximately 9:15, we saw 3 helicopters, 2 small ones and a large one. And we sat there and watched them. They were making big loops behind the compound, just sort of circling, not the compound, but behind it. And I got the camera out and proceeded to shoot the helicopters flying around. So I've got 3 of them. We put the camera back in. We look up, and a cattle trailer goes by. It's chock full of ATF agents. And we're sitting there, and about 2, 3, 4 seconds later, another cattle trailer goes by.
He's saying cattle trailer. I couldn't make that out the first time I listened to this.
Saw a truck come in, and very long, truck in the front, then this long thing. The second truck stopped, and barely stopped, and a man jumped out and all kind of whatever gear it was he had on, and had a gun in his hand. He says, "Okay, boys." Then I heard a voice to the right of me, downstairs. I could tell it was at the door. Then I heard a voice on the outside. Then I heard another voice inside, and then I heard shots outside.
And when we drove up, the Davidians opened fire. And I'm sickened by any other assertion. I sat there and I watched it. And the gunfire came through those double white doors. I watched it. It's unbelievable, but that's what happened. And anybody else who says anything different, they shot first. And if I thought that an ATF agent would drive up in front of a structure and shoot, I'd throw my badge in the garbage. It didn't happen.
If the Branch Davidians intended to ambush those people with 48 machine guns and 50 caliber machine guns, and they came up in unprotected cattle cars with nothing but tarps on them, they would have blown them away. So that convinced us that they did not, that is, the Davidians did not fire first. I sat by that door for several hours. I went in and out of that door 10 times, and I saw the bullet holes on the door on the right side. Almost every bullet hole was an incoming round. And what I mean by that, it's a metal door. You could easily tell that the bullets were incoming rounds. They were punched in. Now, I'm not the Marine expert that Jack Zimmerman is, but I've been hunting since I was 10 years old, and I know a bullet hole when I see it. And those were bullet holes that were punched in.
Of course, the majority of bullet holes would be going in that direction, because the Davidians are not going to keep the door closed and shoot through it.
What you need to find is the videotape that was made of the raid. It disappeared. What you need to get is the photographs of the front that are similar to the one that's being displayed right now. Now, you have the power to get that evidence, and you ought to get it.
That is not fair. That is not a proceeding that is right. If we want to go over the issue of who fired first, then we should, wait a second, I'd like to finish my point.
It's not a point of order.
It is a point of order.
It is not a point of order. You are out of order.
Zimmerman.
I will just make one comment to the witnesses relative to the videotape in the front door. We have consistently asked as a committee to get a copy of a videotape, which they now say is blank. We have asked for the door, and the door is missing.
How do you lose a door?
The first cattle trailer had already pulled up. The second one was pulling up when we got about halfway down the driveway, and all hell broke loose.
Okay, when's that?
All this is happening while they're supposed to serve a knock search warrant. You know, they knock on the door and serve the warrant. And you have one group of ATF agents who goes to the front of the building. There's a very large penned-up area that we had for fawn, an Alaskan Malamute, and her 4 pups that were living there. And they shot them in cold blood, first thing. This was an unreasonable
search done in an unreasonable manner with excessive force. And the law is clear. Even an arrest by lawfully constituted officers can be resisted if, before anything else happens, those officers use excessive force.
They, of a couple of agents or a couple of detectives walking up to somebody's front door or knocking on a door in three-piece suits to execute a warrant of any kind is over. And that's where we stand. We stand between the Koreshas of the world and everybody here. We stand.
So let me paint this spot right here.
Yeah, the 75 men around our building and they're shooting at us in Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel? Yeah, tell them there are children and women in here to call it off. Who is it? Wayne! Wayne! Tell me what's happening, Wayne. Your women and children in danger! Wayne! I'm under fire! I'm gonna call out! What? I'm gonna pull back! I have a right to defend myself! It's starting firing first!
Now I want y'all to watch these three guys crawl in this window.
First 15, 20 minutes, it was get the job done, shoot the video. And then when you see people getting shot, you can hear people screaming.
So those three guys are in there, and this guy on the outside, which is the fourth guy, he gets shot while he's trying to go in. And there are people, those three that went in end up dead. So there are people that believe this guy here was shooting at them, and they shot back at him.
And the bullets hitting. I have two daughters. I started thinking about my daughters. And at that point, I wondered, how the heck am I going to get out of here?
Somebody said to me, Winston Blake is dead. I said, where's he at? And they said, he's up in his room. So as I was approaching Winston's room, I could hear water running, and I couldn't figure it out. You know, what would that be? You know, as I turned into his doorway, Winston's lying on the floor beside his bed, and a pool of blood and water, and there's water pouring into the room from just dozens of bullet holes in the water tank that was right outside his window, and the window was all shattered and everything. I figured that, judging from the angle of the bullets coming down from the outside and into the room, that it had to be from helicopter. There's no buildings, tall buildings out the back. Anybody on the ground couldn't have shot at that angle into the water tanks.
The Davidians shot back. The helicopter landing in the foreground has been forced down by multiple hits. 17-year-old Peter Gent was inside the silo scraping rust when the raid began. Gent is barely visible in this news video as he climbed to the top to see what was going on. The video apparently shows him being shot from this passing helicopter. Gent falters and then drops back onto the silo's roof. Federal officials didn't let the Davidians remove his body for 5 days.
So you can see what's going on here.
Can I interject? Oh, sorry.
Sure.
Go ahead. One little thing, side note, that came up over and over, and I've verified it 10 different ways. The individuals that went in that window that killed were all bodyguards for Bill Clinton during his campaign. Every
Correct.
single one of them. And conveniently, they will never be saying their 2 cents.
Correct. So, yeah. This video is very difficult to watch. I realize that. But obviously it's very important that we do watch it. I want to point out a couple of different things. The way in which this unfolds, you can tell every bit of it is military in nature. So one of the things you're going to find out is that General Boykin and General Schumacher was called in prior to the launching of this raid into Washington, D.C., and they were asked to collaborate on the planning. And that's verified. That's not even up for debate. But I want you to keep your eye out, because we've also now found out that there are at least 10 Delta, SOF, 214 people and 2 extra that are on site during this entire unfolding. So I want you to keep your eye out. I'm going to go back and show our next segment here.
And can you explain to everybody that that is against our Constitution?
Well,
you know it better than anybody.
This is obviously the posse comitatus, in that you cannot use active duty military outside of like a national, like a martial law thing, when you can use the Marines. You can't use the Army at all, period. Dot. There's not even a question. They used not only Army personnel, they used Army tanks, they used Army vehicles to gas the buildings, they used Army weaponry. Military grade ammunition was used on these people, as you're going to find out. Everything about this was a military operation. So,
thank you.
Let me move up to our next one.
Bullet went through the door jamb, and he dove into the car. And we had to physically make the phone call. And this is, from my understanding, the first time that an ambulance had been called. And this was well into the gun battle. For some reason, they didn't have any communication. Why would we have to call for an ambulance?
Nobody was going to get us out. The Fleming County Sheriff's Office, who always did a good job in this case, could not get us out of this. We couldn't call 911. I mean, we couldn't call anybody.
Well, it just seems interesting to me that they didn't even have telephones or communications to get that 911 communication back and forth that Wayne Martin had from inside the compound for 20 minutes trying to stop the shooting. But at the same time, they had fax machines, telephones, and computers, and were ready for whatever PR they had. That was a mighty strange operation, to say the least, and certainly a fatal flaw, not to pun a word.
Mr. Hartnett, was there a raid plan?
We had pieces of it, if you know what I mean, that they hadn't brought it together. It was right in the middle of an order going out to the field, giving them specific instructions on how to, written raid plan, how to bring it together and forward it forward. It was out for coordination at the time. What I received was written, but very, very abbreviated.
So what he's telling you is they launched an attack to kill almost 100 Americans, and they didn't have a plan. And if you believe that, I got a bridge to sell you in a swamp. They had a plan. This is a disguise, kind of a sleight of hands. They're talking about a formal raid plan that you put on the shelf, not an actual situational operational plan that you're going to use for the field, because they had that plan. That plan was set up in Washington, D.C. with the advice of General Boykin and General Schumacher. That plan was hurried from Washington, D.C. to WACO. They are mixing apples and oranges here. He's talking about a plan that sits in Washington, D.C. that is a generic training document that sits on a shelf on how they think things like that generically would happen. That was not the operational plan that they used for the raid, because that plan was in the field. It had been written in Washington, D.C. So you need to keep that in mind. All right, let me get to my next clip. Let's see.
Agents were out of ammunition.
they could have killed nearly every ATF agent out there the day of the raid had they kept shooting. But when they said they would leave their property, they quit shooting.
You got to argue with me, you come and argue with me. You come point guns in the direction of my wife and my kids, damn it, I'll meet you at the door any time. And I'm sorry some of you guys got shot. But, hey, God will have to sort that out, won't he?
The chair recognizes Mrs. Taylor from Mississippi.
Do you have any combat experience?
26 months, sir. Commanded 2 artillery batteries in Vietnam.
In Vietnam?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Zimmerman, have you seen anything or heard anything that would lead you to believe, or read anything that justifies the murder of those 4 ATF agents and 20 more who were wounded by the Branch Davidians by David Koresh and his followers on the morning of February 28th?
The jury in San Antonio found that the killings of the 4 agents were in self-defense. They were acquitted of murder, sir. Did you know that? They were acquitted of murder and acquitted of conspiracy to commit murder. Every single defendant, all 11 were acquitted of murder.
Are you going to tell me that every murderer in this country who's walked was really innocent?
Well, you asked me, did we know of anything that would say that they weren't guilty of murder? And the answer is yes. If the ATF accidentally or however opened fire on people in their home and all they did was defend themselves in their home, then under the law, that's justifiable homicide. It's not murder.
Is there any way that somebody could believe that justifiable homicide could be used as a defense here?
No, Mr. Schumer. They shot through the doors. They shot through the ceilings. Assertions that we had helicopters or men from Mars shooting at them is nonsense. Our agents were laying on the ground, shooting at a tower 3 stories high. Should we be surprised there's bullets in the roof?
Of course. I agree with you, Mr.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
You must understand that not one agent who was at the raid on the scene on the 28th made a written report of it. That's highly irregular. On March the 1st, the ATF initiates a shooting review. Johnston, the assistant United States attorney, advised Hartnett to stop the ATF shooting review because ATF was creating Brady material. Brady material, ladies and gentlemen, is information that might tend to show that someone accused is innocent. They try to explain this to say, well, that just meant, we don't want to, compromise the prosecution. You don't want to compromise the prosecution by revealing evidence that might tend to show that somebody is not guilty of the charges? Well, that's not where we are in this country, I hope.
That's just one agency. All the other agencies back there are going to back them up. That's including our federal government. We, the people, don't run this government anymore. They do. And they tell all the lies they want.
You can't argue with that. I mean, we don't run this government anymore. They do. And what they just said was that there was not a single one of those agents firing that wrote an after-action report, which is required in their own training manuals. Every single one of them was required to sit down and write a report. And they were told, absolutely do not do that because it becomes Brady material and it will make us look bad. So that's disgusting. That's absolutely disgusting. So let me get to the next little clip here.
Those that are trying to do their best are trying to do their job. They have a family back home too, but they don't understand what he's doing. If they did, they would speak out against it.
Shortly after the wounded arrived, armed guards stood sentry at the hospital entrances. ATF agents comforted each other as they found out the toll taken in this raid. 15 agents were brought to Hillcrest Baptist Medical Center. 3 of them died, including 1 agent who was shot in the head.
Ah! Oh, oh God. Oh. Are you okay? I'm bleeding again. I coughed. Wait a minute. Want to see one of the holes here? Here's one of them. That look nice? One up higher. Thank goodness. This one went out right here.
All right, so I'm going to move it on up here just a little bit.
With no further bloodshed.
The FBI is getting involved now, but it's kind of like getting into a fight with a couple of next door neighbors where the little brother comes over and whips you, and then the big brother comes over to investigate. Anyway, we'll try to work this out.
We're prepared to do whatever it takes and stay here as long as it takes to settle this matter without any further bloodshed.
The Davidians were completely surrounded. FBI snipers were placed in sandbag positions here and here. Their clear field of fire meant anyone trying to leave would easily be gunned down. Sierra 1 was the code name for the front half of Mount Carmel Center. It was the side news cameras saw through telescopic lenses a mile or two away. Sierra 2 was the back half of Mount Carmel. It was completely hidden from public view.
It was the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms that caused this first disaster. Okay, so the FBI takes over. They're very sensible, reasonable. They decide we'll negotiate.
They quickly realized that the negotiators were not in charge, and Koresh at one point says, look, all you guys are anyway are waitresses. You carry my request back to the kitchen where the boss is. They say, look, I can't make the decisions. If I could, things would go better, but the decisions are being made 1,500 miles away in Washington, D.C.
All right, so I'm going to move it forward just a little bit more.
Bringing these tanks and stuff around here, I tell you what, being an American first, I'm the kind of guy that I'll stand in front of a tank. You can run over me, but I'll be biting one of the tracks. No one's going to hurt me or my families. That's American policy here.
Agent Pete Smerick, who was in charge of drawing up the psychological profile of Koresh, counseled a cautious, non-confrontational approach with Koresh in 4 memos written to senior FBI officials between March 3rd and March 8th. According to Mr. Smerick, FBI superiors pressured him to change his assessment to justify a more confrontational approach.
They would do things like play sound tapes of rabbits being slaughtered or Nancy Sinatra singing songs, and then they would bring out lights at night, and not that Nancy Sinatra always was that bad, but the ones that she had kept. The point was this: they were trying to have sleep disturbance, and they were trying to take somebody that they viewed to be unstable to start with, and then they were trying to drive him crazy, and then they get mad because he does something that they think is irrational.
You keep playing where you should be playing, and you keep thinking that you'll never get burned. Ha! I just found me a brand new box of matches, yeah. And what he knows you ain't just what they'll do. One of these days he's dark and I'll walk over you.
So we have a couple of Kansas City's finest members of the SWAT team. This one here is quite a specimen, I tell you. I just, in all my years involved with SWAT, I've never seen a gentleman like this that I've learned so much from in just the short time I've been around him. It's just awesome is about the only word to describe him.
Honed to a fine edge, honed to kill.
That's right. The Rambo. He's just like Rambo out here himself.
Honed to kill, and we're talking about Americans. Honed to kill.
Well, it's getting about the 2-hour mark.
Yeah.
Liza did send me a message, and she wanted to apologize. Apparently, a tower went down in her area, and that is why she had the connectivity issues and ended up having to bail.
Okay, so I'm going to play this one last little clip.
Yes, right here. Mr. Ricks, is there a consideration to use psychological warfare? Have you discussed it at all?
I don't know what psychological warfare is.
It was reported in the paper that you would play loud music, keep bright lights on the compound all night to try to agitate the entire group. Is that a possibility?
We will not discuss tactics of that sort, but I would say the chances are minimal of doing that type of activity. Yes, ma'am.
They're liars.
They did it with Noriega.
They're liars.
The exact same thing.
Yeah, they're liars. Okay. And the audacity of that ass to get up there and say, I don't know what psychological operations is. That's an insult to any American. Yeah, Rosie, he's lying. That's absolutely right. All right. So we're going to stop right there. I have my notes bookmarked where we did the last clip at, so that we can start from here, and we will resume this. If we have time tomorrow, worst case scenario, it'll be Thursday at 7 o'clock. We're going to push through the rest of this because it doesn't get any better. But I wanted to bring this information to you because there are a lot of new things that I didn't know. And I think watching this with our Gladio glasses on, it's quite easy to see how devious our government has always been. Because keep in mind, this is 1993. This is that's 30 years ago. 30 years of them doing this to us. And of course they were doing it before, but I mean, from this time forward, and they marginalize these people so that murdering these people is not looked at in the same way that it would be if they came after you or I. But as far as we're concerned, those Americans are just like you and I, even if they have a different religion. And that's the part that we have to understand. We didn't stand up then. Nobody stood up for those people. Nobody stood up for the people at Ruby Ridge. And every time that we have failed in the past to stand up for these people and their rights, they get closer and close to you and I's family. And that's the reason why we're taking the stand. We're going to expose all of this information, and we're going to take a stand.
And one of the things to remember is that back in 1993, it was not illegal to have an automatic weapon. All you had to do was pay a $200 tax stamp. So what they were doing this for was for essentially money.
It was basically, well, they weren't doing it for money. They took a civil offense of, hey, you owe us $600 and turned it into a murder scene.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for bringing that up because I forgot about that point. Yeah. So.
Hey, guys, don't forget to hit the thumbs up so that the more coverage we get, the more this spreads, the more people have Gladio glasses, and the less chance they can do this again.
And please, if you're not already following us, please follow us. I really appreciate that. The bigger audience we get, obviously, the more visibility we get. If you wouldn't mind, please take this and share it with your friends so that we can get eyes on this. I want everybody understanding what's going on here. I'm going to go through the comments here just real quick. We've got a lot of new people in here. Harvey Bax, I've never seen in here. Of course, one of our favorites, SR71, who kind of herds all the cats in the chat comments. Absolutely love that they got killeried. Yeah, exactly. Who shot the helicopter? Okay, so they showed that there was one of the Davidians that had climbed up that tower, and he actually is the one that shot that helicopter and forced the hard landing there. So, but then they shot the person that was on the tower because one of the other helicopters circled back. And I just want to point out that most of these SWAT teams / sniper / whatever, they wear black. That guy that was laying in that truck was in his BDUs. That guy was military. That was not an ATF. That was not an FBI person. That person that was laying in there was in military clothing. And keep in mind that they had used, because all we've seen so far is the actual initial day, right? And then it goes on the standstill, and then they come back and do the raid the second time. And the kind of bizarre point for me was looking at knowing that they had staged all of this, did mock-up training at Fort Hood, and then seeing somebody that obviously was in military attire there, very disconcerting to me. Yeah, going back and forth to Israel, to America, and the whole thing is just very weird. And I know that there's more here. And so we're hoping to get as many eyes on this as we can, and maybe somebody can help us put all the pieces together. I see Donnie Vision in here. And let's see. Minnesota Patriot. We definitely have a corrupt government. You're absolutely right. And you're absolutely right, Christy. Schumer has not changed a bit, has he? As soon as I started watching that video, and I'm like, son of a gun, Schumer. But yeah, he was in the House of Representatives at the time. Yeah. And it's hard to believe all of these years later, and the SOB is still sitting there.
Right.
Let's see what else we got. Nancy Sinatra. I know, I love that. All right, let's see. WACO ties to Oklahoma City to Las Vegas. You know, Las Vegas definitely was an Operation Gladio. It definitely had helicopters involved. There were definitely shootings from different angles. And that's kind of the point the attorney was just making there, that and it makes my blood boil that other guy is such a liar. That you see interspersed in these video clips that is part of the government mantra in making up the excuses to what happened. Let's see. I think that's about it. We're at the end. Yeah, definitely need your Gladio glasses for this one. Makes you see things completely different. Okay, so that's going to be it. We're going to call it a night. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. And we will see you at the latest on Thursday night. Have a nice evening.